have fun with this one. Hello again, everybody. My name is Andy the Taxman. Welcome to a special edition of the Grappling With Canada podcast. It's been a while, to say the least. But the last day's events had, let's say, inspired me to hop on and do a special video tonight to discuss, honor, talk about, however you want to put it, the Immortal Hulk Hogan. Obviously, a big part of my childhood in the wrestling scene. And when I heard the news, I was actually on vacation. And, it's funny. I'm at Lilac Resort here in just outside of Winnipeg here, and with my family and everything. And, we're sitting down having a bite to eat, and I checked my phone just out of, habit, as people do, and I saw that Terry Bollea, Hulk Hogan, had passed away, and hit me pretty hard. Not in the gut punch, emotional, right in the feels way, but it's weird. It's like you don't expect somebody like that to pass away. Yes, we all know that Hulk's had his health issues throughout the years. We all know what he went through in terms of, endless back surgeries. He had cardiac issues in the past, whether they were reported properly or not. I'm sure we'll get into that later. Reporting is going to be a huge bone of contention for me tonight. So, we're going to have fun with that. But it hit me. It's not somebody you expect to pass away. Yes, I realize that, everybody has their day, if you will, as a morbid thought as that is. But he was just wondering, I just didn't see it. It's like Ozzy Osbourne, right? You just figure Ozzy Osbourne's going to live forever. And he had that incredible live show. And, a week later, that's it. And it's just terrible, like absolutely terrible. So, yeah, it took me by surprise, first off. And, man, what a shock. So tonight we are going to commemorate Immortal Hulk Hogan. I have some wonderful guests that are going to be dropping in and out of the program tonight. I also have some audio from somebody who couldn't make it, but fans of this show will be quite familiar with. I'm doing this via StreamYard, which I've never used before, so why not just complicate me coming back with a brand new podcast with an entirely new setup and things I've never done before. So we're going to have fun with this one anyways. So it's going to be an interesting conversation, but I think it's going to be a worthwhile one in terms of the catharticism. And that is the word. And Evan will correct me if I'm mispronouncing that one. But I think it's going to be a good discussion in terms not just of Hulk Hogan and the WWF. We're going to talk about Florida. We're going to talk about the AWA. Great friend of the show, Benny Scala, is going to be joining us. He has a great piece, and I hope he elaborates on that in some depth with us tonight. So we're going to be talking about that. Obviously, his WWE, WWF run, I should specify, because there are two different ones. We're going to talk WCW. We're going to talk about WWE, and of course, we're talking about TNA. Everything in between, and the ancillary aspects of Hulk Hogan. So without further ado, I'm going to start inviting some of my guests who have been patiently waiting in the green room here today. So joining me, great friend of the show and somebody who you're all very familiar with, we have Evan Ginsberg. Evan, welcome to the show.
Hey, Andy. Good to be back.
We have Benny the Playa Scala. Benny, welcome to the program.
Pleasure. It's been a while.
We have a great friend of the show and first time actual guest on this program, although we did do a hit on the old Impact show that used to run way back in the day. Hollywood Southern Dandy, welcome to the program.
Nice to see you again, Andy.
And great friend of the show and somebody who's been on the program before, and a great friend of mine, BC Hunter. BC, welcome back to the program.
Hey, Andy, thanks for inviting me, and great to see you back online.
Yeah, it's my pleasure, but I'm gonna have to do one of these gimmicks because I have volume out of this, but I don't have volume out of this. I hope you guys can hear me okay. So give me a thumbs up if that's possible, or tell me I sound like shit or something. I don't know.
It's good on my end.
Sounds
Okay,
good.
perfect. Again, everybody loves using brand new technology first time out. So I thought tonight would be a great kind of, not really panel discussion. I don't know if that's the proper way to say it, but a great look throughout the years of Hulk Hogan. Like I said, starting all the way back to the beginning, all the way through. But I also want to parse into that conversations regarding either our personal interactions, our personal thoughts, and also what we thought of behaviors, if you will, moving throughout the trajectory of Hulk Hogan. Now, there is a lot of ground to cover, and Evan had graciously asked me earlier if this would be kind of a no-holds-barred conversation. Twitch, I said, yes, of course. It's been an interesting media landscape. I'm not sure if all of you have followed it over the last couple of days, but it's certainly interesting to see the types of reactions we'll see in the media landscape, and a little bit of the dad's shoes on graves, if that's a blunt way to put it. And I'm sure that's a topic that we're going to get into in a little bit here. But maybe I'll just kick it off with Evan, with yourself. Obviously you've been a part of that New York scene forever. Obviously, same with Benny as well. But Evan, I'll start with you. Just before we get into an in-depth discussion, and we're going to be going all over the map here, maybe just give us just a little bit of an overview of your, we'll say, connection with Hulk Hogan and what he kind of meant to your generation growing up in the New York scene.
I saw Hogan as a heel in the early 80s in WWF and later WWF. And he was basically doing superstar Billy Graham's shtick. And I was not overly impressed by the ring performance, but I saw the charisma. I saw the size. I saw the push he was getting. But interestingly, he never faced Bob Backlund in Madison Square Garden. He wasn't that huge a star yet. He faced Backlund throughout the territory at the Philadelphia Spectrum and other arenas, but not at the Garden. But when I realized this guy was something, was he headlined Nassau Coliseum against Andre the Giant. Heel Hogan against face Andre the Giant, and they had a good crowd. Nassau was not a big drawing arena, and there were a good 10,000 people in there, and that was the main event. And I said, wow, this guy has something. And I looked at him differently at that point. And then on the Big Shea Stadium card, when Bruno and Zbyszko fought, Andre and Hogan also, that was like the co-feature. And that was a huge show, and it was a big deal, that match. So I looked at him differently rather than just, oh, he's another guy copying Billy Graham. This guy's a drawer in his own right and a major player.
Now, for yourself, Benny, again, part of that New York scene, what did you think of kind of the focus New York-wise on Hulk Hogan as he came into that territory? We're going to get into the AWA in a little bit, but just specifically when he came into that WWF territory, just describe that, what it was like for yourself.
Yeah, I think and I agree with everything that Evan had said. I think he first came on the scene in New York in late, like November of '79. He had been wrestling in Georgia, I believe it's Sterling Golden, as a heel, and he came in, and I think Blassie managed him right from the get-go. But I mean, there were some good physiques in wrestling. Like Evan said, Billy Graham had the best, but there weren't that many guys. You had like Atlas and, a couple other guys, even Putski towards the end. he refined his physique. But this guy not only had the physique, but he was 6'7". You just didn't see that. So, I mean, he was green. He had, very little wrestling ability at that time. Ironically, I think his first TV match for the WWF, he won via backbreaker. And it's kind of funny because Bruno was the commentator, and he won the match with Bruno's old backbreaker. But I thought, like, they got to do something with this guy. There's nobody that looks like this guy. And, yeah, I mean, he drew with Andre at Shea Stadium, but he was gone, I guess, in early 81. And I believe, Evan, correct me if I'm wrong, isn't that because Vince Sr. didn't want him to make Rocky III?
I believe so, yeah.
Pretty much gone after that. And then after that, he showed up in the AWA, and, the rest is history after that. But, yeah, I mean, I knew the guy was something special. He had to be with that size. And, he hadn't refined his promo skills yet. He was still green. In fact, before the show, I watched a couple of his old promos as Sterling Golden, and I'm thinking, like, man, that was awkward. He must have worked very hard at it because he got pretty good at it.
Now, this wouldn't be Grappling with Canada if I didn't have some Canadian content, and that excludes myself in this context. So I have with me BC Hunter, so everybody knows, Hollywood Southern Dandy, who you don't know yet, but you will very shortly. But BC, just from that Maritimes perspective, because obviously you had the WWF feeds back in the day, but what was your first interaction or introduction, I should say, to Hulk Hogan, and what kind of a factor did he play in the Maritimes for you?
So I'm born in 75, so 85 is when I started watching WWF, and so you can obviously imagine the impact that Hulk Hogan had on me as a 10-year-old watching and seeing him for the first time. He was he's what drew me to really be a lifelong wrestling fan. He was just so much larger than life. Like Benny said, 6'7" and 300 pounds of solid muscle. It was just something different than you ever saw before. The 24-inch pythons, the rap that he had, the training, say your prayers, eat your vitamins. He made you want to go to the gym, and he made you want to, be a wrestler and all that. And then, so I had the 80s influence of Hogan, and then the 90s when you get into his days in WCW, and here I am, early 20s, and this is when the NWO is starting up. And I mean, these are prime years for me, and to be able to see two golden ages of wrestling, the 80s and the 90s Attitude Era and stuff like that, and witness them in real time. It's funny, I know we'll get into this later, I'm sure, but just when you see so many critics and people celebrating his death and stuff like that, I always think back, it's easy to do that if you haven't lived through it and understand the impact of this. But this guy, not just from a Maritimes perspective, but this guy was an international megastar. Like if you mentioned wrestling and somebody, if you around the world, name one wrestler, it was Hulk Hogan. That's to this day, grandmothers and mothers and stuff like that will say, if you're watching wrestling, was that the Hulk Hogan stuff, right? So he had a major impact on everything. And as a fan here, after watching such local wrestling and stars like Leo Burke and stuff like that, you realize, oh my God, there's something bigger and better out here that I've never seen before. So it was mind blowing at the time just to see him, and then the WWF and just the whole spectacle that was. So just big part of my life, that's for sure.
See, it's funny. You mentioned you're 75. Both Hollywood and myself are 85s. So as you kind of were getting into it, we were a decade or so from really understanding what Hulk Hogan meant. But Hollywood, for yourself, lifetime Winnipegger or just outside of it, close enough for the stone's throw, as they say. What was your kind of reaction to watching Hulk Hogan in the first time you would have saw him? And then as you kind of move through life, what made you go back and really understand who he was and what he meant?
Well, I want to say that the first time I watched Hogan, I remember watching him. My father, his restaurant, so in the late 80s, like early 90s, they used to like take tables out of the restaurant. They would stack up seats almost like a movie theater, and they had like a little 20-inch TV in the corner, and they would buy the WWF pay-per-views because there's only 4 of them at the time. WrestleMania, SummerSlam, Survivor Series, and Royal Rumble. And like I don't know, Hogan was larger than life. He was the man. So
Yeah.
I mean, even when they had those pay-per-view packages, they used to give out a whole bunch of WWF merchandise that you would give out to the patrons as well. And my father cherry picked some of the Hulk Hogan merchandise for me. So like I very keenly remember as like a young child watching, I think it was SummerSlam 91 with like a foam Hulk Hogan finger in my hand. Yeah, so I don't know. And then obviously the NWO stuff, because we were teenagers when he would join the NWO, and that was so cool. And then I remember being in grade 11 when he had that match with The Rock at WrestleMania. And it was like the next day, it was all the talk in high schools. Like, how did he not main event WrestleMania? That made no sense whatsoever. It was icon versus icon. So, but yeah, Hogan's incredible. I don't know what else to really say. So I always loved him as a wrestler.
I mean, for myself, and I've said it, yeah, probably in on the podcast in the past or whatever. But for myself, growing up, we used to have, and maybe Hollywood you'll remember this too. We used to have TSN would show Monday Night Raw, so you'd watch that on Monday, and then after school they would have the WCW like Monday Night Nitro as the replay on TSN. So I'd watch Monday Night Raw live or after work because I was working, that grade 10, 11, 12. So I'd catch the replay if I was working. Then after school, I'd watch WCW, the replay. So I got to see the whole kind of Attitude Era play out. And that, like, I had watched Hogan in the early 90s. I'm sure everybody knows, and I've said it to death, I'm a Bret Hart guy. I've been a Bret Hart fan my whole life. And I still remember that match. What was that? WrestleMania 9 with Yokozuna, and then the whole thing when Hogan came in, beat Yoko for the belt and whatever. I just thought what crap that was. But as a kid, you didn't really understand the politics or anything like that. And then Hogan was gone for me. And then when he showed up in WCW, it was like, yeah, it's cool and whatever to see him in a different, but when the NWO thing happened, that just reinvigorated me as a fan. And that really, like, that whole 97 through 99, even into the early 2000s, I was just all over everything, as I'm sure, like Hollywood, you're probably in the same boat. And I fell out of favor with wrestling, the 2001, like when WCW went into business and it was just the one company, as naive young me knew back then, fell out of the business. Then when the NWO came back in 2002, and then that whole WrestleMania spectacle, I was right. It was like I was back in it and following that. And, as my wrestling fandom has kind of waned over the years, it picked up again when he was in TNA. I was curious what that was going to be. Ended up being a little bit of a disaster. I'm sure we'll get into that a little bit later, but it's an interesting, and then the most interesting part for me is doing the whole history angle with Grappling With Canada. Obviously, Canadian professional wrestling history is what I'm focused on, but I don't know how many books I have, and they're in my office, which is not in front of me right now, but it doesn't matter if it's Brett's book, doesn't matter if it's Pat Patterson's book, doesn't matter if it's a Stampede book, it doesn't matter what book, there's a reference to Hulk Hogan somewhere in there. So to me, that just really talks about the longevity of what he meant dispersed throughout the wrestling fandom. And I think as we get through this program, a lot of people who may just know him as that 80s WWF guy, as BC put it, or, he's just the NWO guy, as some fans would remember him as, whether the 96 or 97 run or the 2002 run. So I think that we'll have some fun kind of getting into this. So as I said, we're going to kind of run. We're not going to go, through his early life and things like that. There are not better programs. Not saying that anybody's better than mine, as they say, but there are programs that have dove deep into his upbringing through in Florida and all that kind of stuff. What I want to really get into is a lot of the AWA talk, because I don't know about yourself, either Evan or Benny, as our resident New York historians, but through all the pieces that I read about Hogan, and the ones that claim to be in depth, and again, journalism, quote unquote, is something that's going to be a real big sticking point for me in the next little bit. I think you probably understand who I'm referring to specifically, but we'll get into that. But all the pieces that I read about, it's like he grew up in Florida and then bam, he's in the WWF and his career takes off. So Benny, why don't you give us the rundown? What happened in the AWA? Because I think that's a big piece of the puzzle that is really missing from a lot of the recounting of the Hulk Hogan story.
Yeah, and Evan can fact check me if I make any mistakes here, but I believe he came into the AWA. It was probably mid '81 after he left the WWF, and he got over. I think initially he came in as a heel, but they saw the crowd just popped for the guy and quickly turned him into a babyface. But he wrestled Bockwinkel, I believe it was in April of '82, and they did one of the fake finishes where he won the match, but then they reversed the decision. And they played that all the way into April of '83. I think it was April 24th, St. Paul Civic Center. And I think there was like 24,000 people. And it was a good match, but that crowd went wild when, he came into Eye of the Tiger, had a shirt on saying, give me the belt or something like that, black shirt, and back and forth match. Referee gets knocked out, the usual stuff. He leg drops Bockwinkel and pins him, and the crowd's ecstatic. But what had happened was Bockwinkel had him in the sleeper hold, and Hogan kind of just went towards the ropes, and he pitched Bockwinkel over the top rope. And of course, they reversed the decision, and everybody, 24,000 people saying bullshit. And
yeah,
I really think, to me, that was a bullet in the heart of the AWA, because that was the chance they had. I wrote a story for Pro Wrestling Stories, just the scenario, Hulk Hogan and the AWA. What if he had won? And it's a two-faceted thing, because number one, what would have happened if he became the AWA champion? How long would he have stayed? In my mind, would Vince eventually have, wooed him with enough money to come to the WWF? Absolutely. But could he have prolonged the life of the AWA just a little bit longer? I think yes. And then on the flip side, was there anybody else that could have taken the ball that Hogan picked up and ran with instead of Hogan? I know Evan, I think, has said in the past maybe he thought like Slaughter could have done it, and I think he could have for a while. I mean, people don't realize how over Sergeant Slaughter was in the Northeast in the the 70s and early 80s. But the thing, to me, I can sum it up in a nutshell as far as did they make the right call. So April 24th, 1983, right? And 4 years later, WrestleMania 3 was March 29th in 87. The Hulk and Andre are wrestling in front of 93,000 people at the Pontiac Silverdome. That very same day, Nick Bockwinkel, who I believe was still the champion at like 51 and change, and Ray Stevens were tag teaming at the Boylan Catholic High School in Rockford, Illinois. So to me, that says that Vern should have at least tried Hogan with the belt.
Yeah, I've maybe hop in on that thought as well.
Johnny Valiant, who was a dear friend of mine, managed Hulk Hogan in the AWA.
Correct.
And he had nothing but good things to say about him as a person. And I remember as an agent, I had Johnny booked for a convention, and Hogan happened to be there. And Johnny said to me, he went over to say hi to Hogan, and Hogan hugged him and greeted him like a dear friend. And I've had many friends this week who are younger than me, who were very broken up about Hogan passing. And I think there's a line in the sand, maybe, I don't know if Benny agrees or not, the older generation looks at Hogan and Vince and the takeover, the expansion, as not a positive thing.
Correct.
And
Yep.
I don't want to be the dark cloud over all of this, but I loved Hogan and Piper. I loved Hogan and Orndorff, Hogan and Savage. But I think after that, it got very cartoonish and geared towards kids. And I think with pretty much all the wrestlers being characters in the late 80s, going into, the 90s, I think Vince threw the baby out with the bathwater. And we don't have the same nostalgia for that era. We look at it as something beautiful prior had died, in a sense. So we many from my generation, and I'm 103 years old, by the way, we don't have the same feelings about Hogan, but as a quote unquote journalist, and I heard Andy using the term sarcastically, and I do understand why when it comes to wrestling.
Oh, we'll get into that.
I think you have to call it down the middle. And Hogan, was a divisive figure, but he did help expand it, not only nationwide, but worldwide. WWF and later WWF was an East Coast promotion. I think the hype that Triple H and these guys do, they took it out of bingo halls and VFWs. I think that's bullshit, because I hope
that's ludicrous.
Quote unquote curse. I mean, I was at Madison Square Garden in the 70s when the Garden would be sold out with 22,000 people, and the Felt Forum for Closed Circuit would be sold out with another 4,000 people. You had 26,000 people, multiple times. So, Vince and Hogan took it out of bingo halls and VFWs. That's a vast exaggeration. But they did take it nationwide and worldwide. That's absolutely true.
Well, they absolutely took it nationwide. The whole bingo hall thing is such crap. And I think, the general fan may not understand what it was like. But even here in Winnipeg, when the AWA was drawing, 7, 8, 9, 10,000 people at the old Winnipeg Arena, the old barn. And, that's just Winnipeg. And back then we only had, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, our population size was like 600,000, less than that, but it's a pretty round number. You're looking at 70s into the 80s. And I mean, even just the drawing general area of Winnipeg as a city, you're only looking at 750, maybe 800,000 people. If you would include Brandon, you include Dauphin, some of the other, even North Bay, or even, I'm sure nobody was driving up from Minneapolis, but that's 8 hours from us, right? So there was no this whole bingo hall crap. I've heard that for years. It's such garbage. I mean, the maybe the lapsed fan or maybe the real young generation, maybe that's what they think. Hopefully they listen to a podcast like this or read journalism from yours. And Evan, yes, I've used the journalism thing denigratively a couple of times now. It's not you personally, don't get me wrong, but there's a lot of just garbage that I've read over the last couple of days. Maybe we'll get into that. Even yourself, BC, like even in the Maritimes, there's smoky bingo hells. Come on now.
Yeah, I mean, and just to touch on Benny's point that he was talking about with the AWA. I mean, not like I'm a big what if guy myself. I love talking about those scenarios. And think about the amount of people that Hogan brought with him from the AWA, that if he had stayed there, they'd still be there, like a Mean Gene, a Bobby Heenan, Tito Santana, different guy, Jesse Ventura. Like these were the mainstays of WWF programming during the 80s, during the height of the rock and wrestling era and stuff like that. Would a Roddy Piper have gone to WWF, if he knew he didn't have the star opponent like Hulk Hogan, things like that, right? So there's always that what if. But yeah, just I'm with you, Evan, as far as this whole bingo halls and stuff like that. We know that wasn't the case. My God, look at what the Jim Crockett Promotions was doing in the Omni and stuff like that, and the NWA was drawing crowds. Look what was happening down in Texas, as far as the Von Erichs and World Class and what Bill Watts is doing. It wasn't just smoky bingo halls. Yes, maybe for your very regional promotions and stuff like that, yeah, for sure. But if the big guys are coming into town, you were getting a crowd. I mean, I watched footage of the AWA when Hogan was there, and when even after he left, and the Road Warriors were on top, and people like that. They were drawing crowds there. They were drawing massive crowds. I've never seen an explosion like that reaction of the AWA crowd to Hogan's false win back in '83. It was just, and it was so cool because the way the AWA would do it, they would have the lights darkened, so you didn't even see a crowd in the background. And as soon as it was over, the lights came up, and all of a sudden you realize, oh my God, there's 20,000 people here that are going absolutely bananas. And then they pulled the quote unquote dusty finish on it, and they just absolutely, I agree, they killed the promotion by doing that. They should have pulled the trigger. Sure, I'm with you. Vince McMahon would have thrown buckets of money at Hogan, and he would have got him eventually. But it might have slowed down that bleeding, and it might have slowed down that momentum, and maybe things would have went a bit different, and it would have staved off the death of AWA at that time.
See, and that's okay. Maybe that, there's two different directions I can take this. I had a clip that was sent in. Dr. Marty Goldstein, who many of you on the program are quite familiar with, he sent in, he couldn't join us tonight. He's actually hosting a CWE card in Grunthal, just outside of Winnipeg here tonight. So he couldn't be here for the program, but he sent an audio clip. You know what? Maybe this is a good time because we're on the AWA subject. Maybe this is a good time to play it. So it's about a 9-minute clip, but it really talks about his perspective of what happened with the AWA during that time, but also the boom that it brought to different aspects of the wrestling scene, and then progressively forward. So maybe I'll drop that in right now. We'll have listened to that, and I think that might spark some discussion as well on the other side. So as I go through my tremendous editing program here, let's drop this in. Let's see. Hopefully this plays, and we can have a little bit of discussion after this. So feel free to grab yourself a drink. This is about a 9-minute clip. Again, Dr. Marty Goldstein, great friend of the show, and then we'll be back on the other side to have a discussion about it.
Hi, wrestling fans. This is Dr. Marty Goldstein. I was asked by Andy to take part in the roundtable about the passing of Hulk Hogan. I am going to be hosting a live event, CWE's annual card in Grunthal, Manitoba, which is about a 50-minute or so drive from City Hall, about an hour from Winnipeg City Hall to Grunthal, and accordingly, I thought about it, but there's really no practical way for me to be able to take part and do what I have to do in front of the crowd and everything else. So he asked me if I would record some thoughts with regards to this, and I appreciate the opportunity. I got into the wrestling industry in April of 1980, and Hulk Hogan would have broken in about 14 months, I think, before I did. So, although I never met him, I did see him when he came to the AWA. I had heard of him. I had heard of Sterling Golden, his original. I guess it was Sterling Boulder. I had heard of Sterling Golden, not Sterling Boulder. I knew the name. I was familiar with Hulk Hogan when he went in under Fred Blassie's mentorship in New York, Madison Square Garden. And so I knew who he was the whole way through. And over the years, I met a number of people, worked with a number of people that knew him and knew him well, including probably at the top of the list, the Honky Tonk Man. And obviously he had all sorts of things to say about Hogan at different points. And other superstars from wrestling history that both with, and I'm just picking a couple of examples here in Manitoba with various promotions. King Kong Bundy did a main event for WrestleMania 2, and I was on a show with Bundy, Jake the Snake Roberts, Paul Orndorff, and what an honor it was. He had a more impact, I think, really, by doing that tour and imparting his wisdom and telling stories. He made a lot of impact here. And guys like him, although there was personality conflicts and everything else, the fact is that it was Hogan that floated everybody's boat because he was a larger-than-life character. I personally, it was a little different for me because I wasn't like a fan. His rise affected our livelihood. We saw what he was doing in Winnipeg, drawing houses. If I'm remembering correctly, it was because the crowd cheered, if I'm remembering it right, because the crowd cheered in Winnipeg in his debut in the handicap match, which, again, by memory was, I think, probably Puppy Dog Pelican and maybe Dave Cochin, maybe. Buddy, before he became Buddy Lane. In any event, the crowd cheered him, and that was right at the beginning of what became the Hulk Hogan, who was such an appealing character to the media and to Hollywood because of his outsized personality. He wasn't, he was athletic and tremendous physical presence. If you see the clip of him beside Johnny Carson, and he just looks enormous. And that superhero character killed the territories because you just can't compete with that and with that marketing machine. And so, as I said, it wasn't necessarily a fan, but you could all obviously appreciate what he did, how he manipulated things to his advantage, the what he meant to people. One thing that I just found really striking is, again, because I'm not saying he was a peer per se, but you get the idea. We're of the same generation, and starting out in these territories, and he had big advantages, being where he was from, and the genetic advantage, obviously. But I didn't realize how deeply rooted he was in the childhoods of so many people. I'm almost going to say most of whom aren't wrestling fans anymore. But Hogan drew in through television, through marketing. I've got some stuff that's like Hogan, and I think it's like a protein powder or something. And I got it because, back in the day, because it was actually pretty neat looking. I don't recall that the powder was particularly impressive. And it's got Hogan and the Ultimate Warrior and Jake the Snake. They're like their faces emblazoned on this tin, and a very unique item. And it's something that people notice, have always noticed when they've been over to my place, and the times I've had, little displays of things. So his passing away is a real seminal moment in the evolution of wrestling and in the I guess chronicles of professional wrestling, because everybody knew who he was, and this isn't like at the regional level. This is across generations and very heartfelt. Even if people found him to be, NWO Hogan was obnoxious or, whatever. People thought the babyface Hogan in his prime was kind of an obnoxious character, especially because, we're Canadians. And so the kind of American jingoism was pretty particular flavor. Nonetheless, when he came up to Canada, I'm going to carry on for a minute here, Andy. When he came up to Canada, he was huge everywhere he went. Toronto, Vancouver, in Winnipeg. By memory, he did two cards here. I'm going strictly by memory. The first two, certainly after he left the AWA. I think he did 4 or 5 here with the AWA. The first one before, I don't know if it was before he filmed Rocky III, but it was about 9 months before it was released. And so Gagne was very fortunate, as was the office in Japan, that they had a guy who was on the ascension because he had these outrageous, over-the-top scenes with Sylvester Stallone, the star of the film. And even I went to the theater to see that. It was It was darn entertaining. He was big here in Winnipeg. The Polo Park Inn used to just give the AWA the key for the pool room. I believe that was recounted in Larry Nelson's book. And Hogan would jam with Gene Okerlund and whoever else on stage at the Polo Park Inn. Legendary stories. I don't ever remember hearing about him going to Blue Jeans. His impact culturally, crossed borders because he's an international star. The fact that he was willing to make fun of himself in terms of doing movies where he played different characters, in some cases they were sillier, in other cases they were, again, sort of supposed to be superheroes. I never watched, I've been out of the movie business, thankfully, for like 23 years, so I've never really watched his films to figure out which one is really good and which one isn't. The one with Zeus obviously was awful. But even in the bad stuff, Rotten Tomatoes, still Hulk Hogan. So I acknowledge the depth to which this loss, especially in conjunction with the other recent deaths, including Ozzy Osbourne. It's been very jarring for people. It's evoked a lot of pleasant memories, which I think is good. As ramped up as Vince McMahon's circus was compared to the territorial offices, and the business I thought I was getting into, and Vince McMahon had other ideas, and they involved Hulk Hogan. It's amazing that people look back at that time as a simpler WrestleMania 3. It's very advanced and technological advances in terms of the presentation, and like people look back at that fondly as like almost like vaudeville. Like my family would have looked at vaudeville. So those are just some random thoughts in a nutshell. If you ever want me on to talk about Hogan's matches, his matches in Winnipeg in particular, or in Vancouver, and he did if I'm remembering right, he did Halifax too, Montreal Forum. That's one other thing I do want to mention is I was able to spend time with Jacques Rougeau with CWE in the last couple of years, and Jacques praised Hulk Hogan to the heavens for facing him in the Montreal Forum and for having that match. And I remember watching that on a Saturday afternoon TV with the Canadian inserts. I don't remember the name of the guy. Was it David Amber or somebody that was doing the inserts? And they showed this clip, and Rougeau pinned Hulk Hogan, and it was unbelievable. And then you never really saw it again. And Jacques Rougeau spoke about that, and friends of mine, I never met him, but I know from friends of mine, mutual friends, right? He took care of John Tenta. The people that helped him on the way up, Ted DiBiase's story is tremendous. That he did the honors when Hogan came in, and then when Hogan was riding the crest, here comes DiBiase. He's basically a role Vince McMahon wished he could have played. And the kind of praise he gets, perfect human being, obviously not, but was loyal to his friends, was genuinely good with kids and charities and all that stuff outside of Richard Belzer. And it's really amazing to me that somebody that comes from wrestling, where we thought Kiniski was a star, or Jonathan, or Mad Dog Vachon, or Vern Gagne, and it's like Bruno Sammartino, who I adore, but ultimately what Hogan did was expand that fan base and expand the media coverage like exponentially. And no one else that I can think of could have pulled that off. I don't know the different character could have pulled it off. The time of Reagan, it's one thing people point out, was the time of Ronald Reagan. Boy, was he ever Ronald Reagan's wrestling champion. Thanks for giving me the opportunity. I hope to hear from the audience. If you ever want to get a hold of me, martygoldlive@gmail.com, and read my columns in the Winnipeg Sun on Wednesdays and Sundays. Thank you, Andy, and best wishes to everybody on the panel.
All right, so that's Dr. Marty Goldstein again. I will have his contact information along with the Great Canadian Talk Show podcast information in the show notes for today's episode for those who are so inclined to check it out, and I hope you do, especially if you're in the Winnipeg and surrounding areas. But there's 3 interesting points that he made that I want to get into. One was about the AWA, which we've been expanding on. One was about his impact with the younger generation. That's something that Hollywood, you and I can touch on, I think, fairly well, in BC as well. And maybe we'll set that off to the side a little bit. And then there's the point that he made about how Hogan dealt with other wrestlers. And that's a bit of a bone of contention. I think that's one we'll punt down a little bit longer into the episode. But just sticking with the AWA, maybe we'll finish this part of this story out. Just, I love what Marty said, just, how, yeah, he was huge in the AWA, and it kind of raised the tide, if you will, for different promotions here in Canada, at least. It is an interesting point that you all have brought up with the what if scenarios, right? What if he had stayed with the AWA? Would that have continued to rise the tide, if you will, for all these other promotions? Or do you guys think that the ascension of the WWF and the nationalization and the expansion would have just happened roughshod over everybody, regardless of Hulkamania being the big mainstay banner person to take that forward in the mid to late 80s? Whoever wants to start up with that one.
Sergeant Slaughter at the time was white hot, and he was basically doing the same gimmick, the All-American, once he turned face, and his feud with the Iron Sheik was similar to Hogan's with the Iron Sheik. Whether he would have had the same success and longevity is a different question, but Vince basically wanted to take over the world, and somebody had to be the face of the company, and I think it could have been Slaughter at the time. But what I saw with Slaughter, especially when he went to Pro Wrestling USA, is he had lost a step or two, and he wasn't quite what he was. And meanwhile, Hogan was at the peak of his powers at that same time. So ultimately, I think Vince, picked the right guy.
Yeah, for sure was the right guy. Just it's one of those things where now you read articles, and maybe this will get me onto my journalism bit here, but you'll read, like, Meltzer had this incredible rant on Twitter, X, whatever you want to call it. Essentially bringing up the point that I had just kind of asked you guys about. If Hogan wasn't the face of that wrestling boom in the 80s, with the WWF national expansion have actually happened, and his contention is that it would have been somebody else. I don't personally agree with that. I think Hogan had to be the guy for that. Yes, you had Slaughter was white hot. Maybe you could have had Paul Orndorff in that situation as possible. But I mean, I really don't see anybody who has that charisma that could have carried the WWF banner into the mainstream national expansion that they ended up having. I think he's the only one who really could have done it. If anybody has somebody else who thinks, but might have been somebody who could have risen to the occasion that I'm not thinking of, like, feel free to voice your opinion. But that, to me, there's nobody else.
Piper.
Yeah, but then you got to turn him face, and I don't know. Does a face Piper in 84, 85, 86, does that? I don't know. That's an interesting one.
He was a face coming from the NWA, right? Though he just
That's
had
true.
the dog collar match with Valentine.
Yeah, that's absolutely. See, that's why I have you on, BC, because I forgot about that entirely. So, and I shouldn't have. I did 7 hours on Roddy Piper a couple of years ago. You'd figure I'd have that one in the memory banks, but
to your point, Andy, I'll say this, and I agree with Evan. Probably Slaughter would have been the right choice, because you would have had the Iron Sheik and the Slaughter. That's perfect. That's a perfect match. But yeah, to Evan's point, I don't think Slaughter maybe goes a year and he's starting to lose steps. So now you got to bring another heel in, which is probably Piper or somebody like that, right? To get hot against him. But to your point, Andy, it is Hogan that brought it to that national level, but it's also the tag team of Hogan and Vince McMahon, because Vince McMahon was just hell-bent on making this the promotion, the national and international promotion and stuff like that. Vince McMahon would have still done that. Vern Gagne was never going to do that. Vern Gagne didn't even want to give Hogan royalty money for the T-shirts he was selling, for Hulkamania and stuff like that, right? Which, so Vern would have had Hogan, and they would have had a great product, and it would have had a white-hot baby face, but I don't think Vern Gagne was going to think of the international way to make AWA the brand. Vince McMahon, no matter who he had, he was going to do it. He might have had to patchwork it with a bunch of people. Maybe he gets Piper and Slaughter, and maybe he brings in a Kerry Von Erich or somebody like that, right? And he patchworks it instead of just having the one guy that he can just put the whole company on his back. But Hogan needed McMahon. McMahon needed Hogan. They were the perfect combination at the perfect time, and it was just lightning in a bottle for them at that point.
I do think that Hogan staying in the AWA with the title, I think he would have neutralized Vince McMahon for a while, especially, because you think of all the guys, we talked about it before, the guys that jumped. You had Heenan, you had Jesse, you had Dr. D, David Schultz,
Yes.
who was a huge opponent of Hogan's. You had Mean Gene. I mean, if they had all stayed, now of course Vern didn't have the business acumen that Vince did, and I don't think he would have expanded. Maybe he would have expanded, but I think at the very least, I think he could have stalled Vince's expansion for a bit.
See, it would have been that he would have stole it there, and then Montreal was still hot. So you would have had two. Not that Montreal was much of a territory per se at that point, but Montreal was still pretty hot, and Montreal had their own version of Hulk Hogan, Dino Bravo, who at that time was just an absolute machine. So, I mean, yeah, maybe they stalled national expansion a couple of years between the two promotions. Stampede by that time was in a bad spot, especially after the Archie Goldie incident, because that would have been right around that time too. And maybe I'm getting my years mixed up, but I want to say that was 84. So, I mean, you got a bunch of territories that are in a rough spot, and just Hogan ends up being the guy who just kind of helps McMahon wipe it out. Yeah, Batman and Robin might be a good, but I'm not sure who is who. I guess it depends on what they thought of each other. Might be a way to look at it. The other point that Marty had brought up, and Hollywood, I'm going to get your thoughts on this one, because you and I are in the same age cohort and all that kind of stuff. So just the impact that he had during we can't speak about the 80s per se because we missed half of it, but maybe VCL actually gets you on that one as well. Just the impact on that younger demographic through the 80s into the 90s in that WWF run. Just maybe discuss a little bit about what it meant, not just wrestling wise, but pop culture wise around, like you said, around the schoolyard, if you will.
This one's for me here. Sorry.
Yeah, I'll let you hop on it. Hollywood started, and BC if you want to get in on that one as well.
I don't know. I'm just trying to think this through right now. So I'm gonna defer, and then I'll come back.
Okay, sure. So BC, I'll lob you the hardball here. So just because Marty had made a good point about Hogan really did transcend. It wasn't just wrestling, right? He had the MTV, he had the merchandising, he had the brand awareness, as they would call it nowadays, right? With the plush, what was his wrestling figure, that plush thing? Anybody remember what those are called?
The wrestling buddies.
Yeah, there it is. What a dummy! I should know that. Was some historian. Yeah, so he had that. It was not just wrestling he wasn't just the wrestling guy. He was this guy who kind of so just in the pop culture lexicon, if you will, and in that younger demographic piece, you just maybe expand a little bit of what he meant in terms of that.
Yeah, I mean, it's for me, the first time I ever saw Hulk Hogan was in Rocky 3, and I was just, and of course they made him look even more gigantic by having, you know, Sylvester.
Oh
Stallone
yeah,
into
that
his-
step stool did wonders.
Yeah, exactly. So you're just blown away, like, who the hell is this guy? But of course, here living in Nova Scotia, I didn't have the channels, the cable TV to see him on AWA or whatever, right? So the first time I saw Hogan associated with WWF, and this goes to kind of what Evan and Benny were talking about as far as the cartoonization of wrestling towards the late 80s. But I get what WWF was doing as well, was Hulk Hogan's Rock and Wrestling. That's the first time I saw Hulk Hogan was because of that cartoon. And then smartly, immediately after Hulk Hogan's Rock and Wrestling was WWF Superstars of Wrestling, right? So now you see the cartoon and now you see the real guys that you just saw in the cartoon. So they were getting that young audience attached to it. And Evan and Benny can speak to this too, because they lived through this time period. But growing up in the 80s, it wasn't like today where you had YouTube and you had, you know, you can find wrestling matches and all these different things and go to a streaming device and find all those things. For me, it was just this perfect time. Like, I didn't get to see, you know, the stuff on MTV. We didn't have MTV here, but I mean, I can imagine what it was like being in the States and watching this wrestling event on MTV and going, holy crap, this has really gone mainstream now. But for me, the big one was Saturday Night's Main Event. That's really just etched into my psyche as far as associating wrestling, and just seeing Hogan as the face of Saturday Night's Main Event. I started watching Saturday Night Live because of Saturday Night's Main Event, because I'd be tuning in every Saturday hoping that there was wrestling on. Then I became a fan of Saturday Night Live. I saw it today. It blew my mind. I forgot about this, but I remember him appearing on Dolly Parton's show. Here I am at 12 years old watching the Dolly Parton show, just see Hulk Hogan on it. It wasn't for Dolly Parton, right? You know, so it's like, because he was in a video with her and stuff like this. He was everywhere. He's hosting Saturday Night Live. He's on, like, he was a workhorse as far as, he's like John Cena was, you know, like, just as far as doing every press event and everything. He was like, they talk about the press schedule that they had for WrestleMania, and him and Mr. T, and Mr. T was burnt to a nub, but Hogan was still going. He's like just this guy that's just going. I'm sure there were some other things that helped him keep the energy up that we won't talk about, but yeah, as far as the pop culture thing, growing up in the 80s, it was just mind blowing. Like, just it's like Michael Jackson at the time. I got to live through like these mega stars at this time, back when you didn't have access to them through YouTube and through streaming and through everything. You actually had to work to see these people. I would walk down the video store and rent the Best of WWF Volume 2 and watch it over and over and over again, and be introduced to all these other people that I never saw. You know, it's just, he was just this unbelievable presence, and just something you never saw before. He was like He-Man come to life on screen, and it just blew your mind. So as a kid, I get it. I myself, I agree with Evan. I wasn't a fan of the cartoony style that we got at the end of the 80s and the early 90s. It really kind of turned me off a bit. Their peak for WWF, I would say, was from 85 to 88. And that was just amazing to watch WWF at the time. Plus, you had the NWA going on all cylinders with Flair and the Horsemen and all that stuff too. So it was a magic time to be a wrestling fan, not just for Hogan, but for everything that was going on. It's like he made everybody else up their game, and everybody felt like a major superstar because everybody wanted to see wrestling. So yeah, I get it. I get why they went cartoony. I get why they tried to go with all these characters to draw kids in. And now those kids hopefully are fans today and introducing their kids to the product. But, you know, it hurt wrestling as well at that time, going that cartoony route.
I was physically at Madison Square Garden the night that Roddy Piper clocked Lou Albano. And
with the gold record.
There's the clock, and there's Hulk Hogan. And as an old school fan, part of me, it was like my spider sense was tingling, and I'm like, this isn't good. But the other side of my brain was going, this is really wild. This is entertaining. We've never seen anything like this before. And in those initial years, I am so grateful to have seen heel Piper at his prime, blowing the roof off of Madison Square Garden time and time again, whether it was with Hogan or with Snuka, teaming and also teaming with Bob Orton. It was very underrated. We would watch Piper and the match would end and you could breathe again. That's how exciting it was. So this was a new era. And in those initial years, 84, 85, 86, it was really exciting and something new and different. And here's a little detail a lot of people probably don't know. At Madison Square Garden, you were not even allowed in the building unless you were 14 and over. This was not geared towards kids. This was all about the super heavyweight heel, taking on Bruno, Pedro, Backlund, and a bloody revenge in the second or third match, in the series. And Hogan took it to a whole different place. And here's another little detail that people may not realize. Bruno would headline the Garden 12, 13, 14 times a year. Hogan only came in 3 or 4 or 5 times. So when you say Hogan was a much, much bigger deal than Bruno, that could be arguable also because Bruno held the belt 8 or 9 years in total. Hogan had 1,400 days. It was two apples and oranges, great for different reasons, but there's little points that people tend to forget 40 years after the fact.
Yeah, just an interesting point you made about the argument of like who is more important to wrestling in terms of WWF or just wrestling in general, right? Hogan or San Martino. And I mean, you could then it throws into the whole thing. Okay, what about Londas? What about somebody? There are so many names. Says right. There's so many names. Like, do those names mean more in wrestling? Probably. You can make the argument for sure, especially in certain markets, right? Like New York. I'm sorry, like if you're talking the king of New York wrestling, it's San Martino, and that's it. Like there is nobody else, right? Even not just New York, but you go that whole East Coast. I mean, you can make the argument that it's San Martino all the way down till you get to the South, really. Probably the biggest name of all time. But in terms of somebody who kind of transcends into the pop culture, it's probably Hogan. There's not many. Bruno for sure transcended into pop culture, not to the same level. And it's weird, right? If you would have put that 70s Bruno into the 80s WWF, I don't know that he makes that cultural jump, if that makes any sense.
Yeah. Well, The Rock was the #1 action film star in the world.
Yes, absolutely.
Now Hogan was a B movie star.
I think B's being a little bit generous.
Whole different level of stardom if you're talking about what The Rock has done. Yeah.
But Hogan never really lost
in terms of Hollywood box office, I mean, The Rock has just killed everybody, including his general cohorts, plus a lot of wrestling fandom now. If you follow the internet wrestling fandom, much to my chagrin, I've poked my head in that a couple of times. But just so I know we spent a lot of time on the AWA into the 80s of WWF, but kind of fast forwarding, it's interesting. I want to stick on this point for a second, and I will expand on this, believe me. But when you look at big names like a Thez, like a Londos, like a Bruno, they were responsible for massive booms in professional wrestling for sustained amounts of time. But I don't know if any of them had that second career renaissance or resurgence like Hogan did. You could easily say that, not that he was responsible personally, it was definitely that Batman and Robin combination of him and Vince had that massive boom in the mid to late 80s that just made wrestling explode. Then you fast forward to Hogan, who was essentially washed, as the kids would say nowadays, in WCW, floundering. He was, let's face it, a mid-carder at best in the fans, in the eyes of the fans at that time. Then the outsiders come in, Hall and Nash, who are, I'll show you guys this as a kick. So I just had my 40th birthday a couple of days, or the other month or whatever. So a friend of mine got me this, and I don't know if you guys can see that properly, but I woke up to this sign in my lawn. So obviously my favorite tag team of all time anyways, the Outsiders, they roll into WCW and they spark this whole revolution. And then Hogan, rightly or wrongly, latches on, leeches into it, falls into it, however you want to say. There are many different conflicting stories, but he gets involved in it, creates the next wrestling boom in that 96, late 96 into 97, 98 with the NWO. I'm not sure that there's many wrestlers, and yes, we'll get to the TNA stuff maybe a little bit later, but I'm not sure if there's any wrestlers that have had that second real resurgence, that boom that have carried two different companies in wrestling in the past. If I'm forgetting anybody, I stand to be corrected, but I don't think that that's the case. Outside of maybe no, not even Tolos in because I can't say that he had two different booms. He had the massive one, and he had kind of the secondary one in California, but I don't know if he had two. Maybe Evan can correct me. I'm not sure.
Tolos was huge in LA for about a decade. He didn't have Hulk Hogan's worldwide fame. I mean, the LA TV went into other markets. We saw it in New York, but I don't think you could compare Hogan's fame. Tolos wouldn't compare to a Hogan on a worldwide level. There are people today that never even heard of Tolos, and I love Tolos, but I'm just
which is a goddamn travesty. But we can get into that later, maybe. But yeah, there's not many guys. So maybe this is a more salient point that Hollywood can speak on. In that mid 90s, like BC, you would have been just finishing high school in 97.
Yeah, I was in college in 97. Yeah. Okay,
so maybe you're the same cohort as well, but Hollywood, I know for us, like that's what everybody was talking about that in school, like that. And like for me growing up, teachers hated it. They couldn't stand everybody's doing the too sweet or the crotch chops or whatever, and like you did get thrown out of class. Like, go get out of here, go to the principal's office, talk wrestling somewhere else. So it was what a time to be alive. That's all I gotta say about that. But maybe just talk about for yourself that whole real resurgence of Hogan and the NWO kind of taking over wrestling in the mid to late 90s.
Yeah, that opening promo too, where all the we had to talk about the fans. Like, he was so hated when they were throwing garbage at him at the ring too, and I can't believe you sold out in the whole Mean Gene, and Mean Gene did such a great job there too. And Heenan, I told you he was bad all these years, and that was absolutely incredible. But then it kind of went from like him being hated to him kind of being the cool heel, and then I don't know, they kind of killed the whole thing by bringing in so many different members for the NWO instead of keeping it as the original 4 or 5 guys or whatever it happened to be. And it just kind of got, it kind of wore out. But then there was also those things where it got resurgences where you brought in Dennis Rodman and they teamed up. And I think they fought DDP and Jay Leno, if I'm not mistaken. Or maybe that was, it wasn't Jay Leno. It was, maybe Jay Leno was another one too, but they had
Karl Malone,
Utah Jazz, Karl Malone, yeah.
Yeah, keep going, Hollywood.
No, that's pretty much it. Like, it's, again, I don't know, it just kind of faded out, and then it got really weird with the NWO Black and White, and then you had the NWO Wolf Pack, and all that kind of stuff. And then it kind of went away until
Although we did get the greatest theme song of all time with the
the
Wolfpack, so I will say
Wolfpack
that.
was incredible. But it just kind of faded. Then he kind of had that almost a third run, if you will, because I think that other run from like 2002 to 2006 was incredible too, which then obviously led to the induction into the Hall of Fame.
So yeah, maybe we should touch on that a little briefly as well. So in that 2002 range, I mean, WCW is gone. What a missed opportunity, that whole thing. I mean, we could do a whole show on that probably, but it kind of gets away from the whole point of Grappling With Canada. But anyways, the whole WCW invasion thing, blah, 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 all that happens. But then you have the NWO coming in. Again, much maligned politics, and I'm sure Benny and Evan, you probably have maybe a little bit more of the inside knowledge of what happened there. I'm not sure, but NWO comes in, and then we have the massive icon versus icon match at WrestleMania that just blows every record book in Toronto specifically away, and really reignited a lot of fans to not just Hogan, but back to wrestling. Like, I'll say for myself, I was really into it, that 96 to 99 kind of fell out after WCW went away, and then the NWO comes in, and then that main event, and bam, I'm right back into it. I'm sure I'm not the only one. So yeah, it's an interesting set of circumstances. And again, you can contribute it, like Hollywood said, to Hollywood Hulk Hogan and the NWO coming in.
Hogan's heel turn was one of the greatest heel turns ever. It was shocking, and they beat WWE for 2 years in a row. Well, back then WWF. I mean, it was huge, and it worked, and it was great. But at some point, they jumped the shark. They had 137 members and their mothers NWO, and it was overkill. But when it first hit, boy, the T-shirts were everywhere. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And I still have mine. Obviously, it's a little snugger than it used to be, but that's okay. Nothing wrong with that.
Gotta give credit where it's due. That was an all-time great heel turn.
And, in the past, and obviously, I covered a lot of big moments in Grappling With Canada, probably none bigger than when Koloff pinned Bruno for the title, right? Just the crowd reaction, right? But like for us in the television era, we never really saw a reaction an organic fan reaction to something like that when Hogan turned heel. And that was for us like the blurring of wrestling and reality, right? We didn't really know is this real? Are they really allowed to do that? And so that was an interesting part for us growing up, for myself growing up. I'm sure Hollywood, you probably feel the same way, but even BC on the college campus, I know you're a lot smarter than we were at that point in your life, but for you, it must have just been a wild ride because you had seen, the cartoon version, right? And to go to that is quite a bit different, I'm sure.
Yeah, I mean, you would never expect Hogan to turn heel, and it's weird because we knew Hogan had been heel many times in his past,
Yes.
So it's not like the guy was a good guy forever and just turned heel. But
it's no different than body slamming Andre, right? Same thing,
yeah.
But yeah,
Same
I digress.
Thing, I agree. Yeah. So
but even in 95, they tried to make him go heel he turned quote unquote to the dark side, if you will, so that he could overcome I believe it was the Dungeon of Doom.
Yeah.
And then, but that was it was so stupid, and it was also very childish too. And then he just kind of went away from television entirely.
Yeah. And I mean, it goes back to yes, Hogan was probably the greatest politicker in wrestling as well, but he was smart. He hooked on to the hot thing with the NWO, and I love Hall and Nash. I thought they were fantastic, but that NWO angle was not going to be as strong as it was having the biggest star in wrestling turn heel and join your group like nobody else, even if it was Sting or whatever. Hogan joined them, just put it over the top, and then
whoa! Wait a minute! You're trying to tell me that Mabel could have been in the third man? It would have been huge.
Well, Mabel is huge, but it wasn't the same thing. But yeah, but no, I mean that's just so it just ignited another boom in wrestling with that. And I mean, then of course WWE had to step up their game. And the nice thing was you got the opposite of what WWE was in the past. So WCW was relying on the old school bigger guys and stuff like that, and maybe not as much work rate, whereas WWE now had to get push guys like Shawn Michaels and Bret Hart and, you know, different guys like that. So, and it worked. We got Stone Cold Steve Austin out of it. So it ignited things, and then everybody just kind of ran with it, just like in the 80s when it got ignited and people ran with it, right? So it was an amazing time to be a wrestling fan. And it was, once again, it was right back into the zeitgeist and into the media and all that. And they're showing up on Jay Leno, and they're showing up on different TV shows, and everybody's a superstar now. So pretty interesting time.
So we are going to move on to, we'll say some of the more controversial topics, although I don't want to point it, or I don't want to paint it like this is going to be a burial segment or anything like that. But there are aspects of the Hulk Hogan lexicon that should be brought up and should be discussed, and discussed fairly, I would say, because anybody knows me, or anybody who's listened to this program over the years, we are pretty fair about everybody that we cover. The one exception is Bob Sweetan. F that guy, piece of shit, because he abused children. And I was very upfront and clear with my thoughts of him when I did that episode. But outside of that, I've been pretty fair and honest about everybody I've covered throughout the course of Grappling with Canada. So in terms of the politicking, I think one of the most obvious out-front examples of it, because there's a lot of backstage stuff, and we'll get into that as we go here, but one of the most obvious ones would be the TNA run and what happened there. So I'm pretty sure nobody's going to, but put your hands up if you watched the whole TNA debacle when him and Bischoff showed up to run the show. Okay. Yeah, Evan saw some of it anyways. So, and correct me if I'm wrong, and please interject if there's something I leave out, but we had the whole Dixie Carter trying to run things, Vince Russo in the background talking your ear off. Actually, funny enough, Jim Cornette on his last few podcasts was talking about kind of what happened in that whole 2008, 2009 era leading up to when Hogan and Bischoff came in. So when they came in, the whole idea was that they were going to come in, reimagine the TNA wrestling to bring it forward more in line with the whole reality-based programming, which had worked in the mid to late 90s until, you know, there's 197 people in NWO and no WCW storyline made sense anymore. And that's back when Evan was only 143, not 193.
Yeah.
But we had Hogan and Bischoff kind of come in and run roughshod over TNA wrestling. Now, on one side, you could say that was, and demonstrably true, it was some of the highest ratings that program had ever gotten and probably will never get again. I think they, at their peak, were 1.1 or 1.3 million viewers on Spike TV, which is you look at the wrestling landscape today, just what an absolute wasteland it is. However, the flip side of that is you had Hogan and Bischoff running things the way that they wanted, which included the band, which was essentially the NWO repackaged as the TNA version, where you again had, you know, Hogan, Hall, and Nash. I believe Sting came in, and then again it gets watered down to oblivion, and then you have all the other backstage machinations, and that whole experiment fizzles out and really I think that was the first big public dent that was put in the Hulk Hogan veneer, if you will. And I know that we're going to get into some of the other stuff in a little bit, but Evan, I know that you were tangentially following it at the same time. So what were kind of your thoughts about that TNA run? What happened when Hogan and Bischoff came in there?
Well, I thought that TNA should have been an alternative to WWF in that the X division, and the smaller guys, that should have been the focus. And then Hogan comes on, with his boys, and all of a sudden it's about them, and they took it in a whole different direction. And I don't think it was the right way to go. And I don't think they've ever fully recovered. I was just at their pay-per-view the other night.
Oh, that's right. You were too.
Yeah. And, it's taken them 23 years to draw 7,000 people, live. It's not a wild success. And the pay-per-view itself was a mixed bag. I was sitting there for 4.5 hours. So I think Hogan did more harm than good at the time, with the exception of the ratings might have spiked somewhat. But as far as the quality of the show, it was not what it had been. And guys like AJ Styles were what made that. And, Hogan and his boys were a whole different scenario.
Yeah, I'm not sure if anybody else watched back then. I mean, you could tell by the ratings, probably not very many. But I was watching at that point in time. That's when, they kind of neutered the exhibition, as you said, Evan. That was kind of the hallmark of TNA at that time, was the exhibition. But those guys were incredible. And some of the matches, like I remember some of those matches that, like the Motor City Machine Guns were having in the Full Metal Mayhem matches. Those just incredible stuff. And it was like a clash of eras is really what it was.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
I know Hogan gets a lot of grief for that, and rightfully so, because he did politic a lot of it too. A lot of that blame has to go on the feet of Bischoff as well. He's done a fairly good job of skating that over the past couple of decades since then. But again, Batman and Robin, right? You had Vince and Hogan. You had Batman and Robin again, Bischoff and Hogan. Worked in the 90s until it didn't, and it completely fell apart in the TNA era. And that really, like you said, really set him. I remember like that 2011, 2012, it was just death watching that show. It was just brutal. And I mean, when you're, what pay-per-view was it? I want to say it was Hard Justice in 2011. Your main event is Hogan and Piper. Oh, no, sorry. It was Hogan and Flair. And all it was just, it was a glorified bloodbath, much like you see in AEW now, which is not my cup of tea. I didn't like it then, and I still don't like it now. So, I mean, that kind of shows you my thoughts on that. So that was kind of the first real public crack in the veneer. But then we had, obviously, what happened with the Gawker incident. And that's something that we should discuss, and we should discuss it fairly. So for anybody who's not aware, although based on media reporting, I'm not sure why you wouldn't be at this point in time, there was a leaked sex tape between Hulk Hogan and the wife of Bubba the Love Sponge that was released by Gawker, obtained by Gawker through nefarious means. We'll put that in quotation marks. Released and accompanied with the quote-unquote sex tape and ancillary were a bunch of unfortunately racist comments that were spewed by Hulk Hogan at the time. And I mean, that really set a lot of fans off. And that's a lot of what you read today in the commentary. And that's why I made the comment about, it's interesting to see people putting their dance shoes on before Hulk Hogan's even, kind of in the grave, right? Was that incident. So I think we should discuss that and just what it means, what I don't know how you phrase it, what that means in the Hulk Hogan aura or fame or whatever you want to say. I don't know if anybody wants to lead off with that, but I have my own thoughts, but I want to hear what everybody else thinks just in regards to how that whole situation played out and then the aftermath. And before I kind of go on my little soapbox here. And nobody wants to touch that one. I know. Evan, you go ahead, because I know you had a couple of thoughts about that one. And this is no holds barred, as they say.
I think with any celebrity, especially after they pass and it's fresh and it's raw, it's very awkward talking about the negative things that they did in their life. And I was weaned on don't speak ill of the dead. And it's uncomfortable, but I think ultimately you have to separate the artist from the flawed human being. You know, you could go back to Charlie Chaplin. There were scandals in his life, you know, that people forget 100 years later. You know, ultimately Hogan's going to be remembered for being a pop culture icon and arguably the most famous wrestler of all time and such. And the scandals 50 or 100 years from now will not be anywhere near as important. I mean, you could argue that Bill Cosby is the greatest stand-up of all time, or at least between him and Richard Pryor. You know, the fact that the guy was not a good human being, you know, maybe 100 years from now, it won't be remembered as much as the guy had one of the biggest hits in the history of TV, and he was one of the greatest stand-ups on the Mount Rushmore of stand-up. So it's a long-winded way of saying, yeah, I disagreed with a lot of stuff that Hogan did and said, but wrestling fans also hypocritically have their good list and bad list, and they'll adore some guys who were involved with spousal abuse, you know, that are their heroes and icons, and they'll forget that. But, you know, you kind of have to call it all down the middle if you're a quote unquote journalist. And, you know, it is what it is. He was a iconic pop culture figure. And his personal life was pretty disastrous to a certain degree. And like Michael Jackson and James Brown and others, it's going to continue to be with, you know, court cases, with, you know, with the fortune left behind and such. It's going to continue. It's if you live a life that's filled with chaos to a degree, your death is going to have chaos to a degree. I hope I answered your question fairly. I tried.
No, I think, well, you, like you said, you call it down the middle. Benny, I for yourself, somebody who's written numerous stories on pro wrestling, prowrestlingstories.com. Like, what are your thoughts? Like, how do you approach a subject like that? Like, how do you separate the artist from the art? Do you separate the man from the myth? Like, how do you approach something like that?
I don't know that you can. You know, bottom line is the guy is a flawed human, where he was a flawed human being. But then, you know, my next statement would be, but who isn't? Right?
Yeah.
I mean, he's one. There was, as far as I know, there's nobody perfect on this earth. I mean, did he do some dumb things? Yes, but I mean, I always tell people, you know, the line for screw up starts with me and forms to the back. You know,
yeah, great line.
No, but it's just that, you know, but nobody cares really what I do. Whereas, you know, a guy like Hogan is under the microscope, and everything that he do is going to be dissected 19 ways to Sunday. And, you know, I mean, I could have said something along the lines of what he said, and nobody never would have known that I said it. But everything that he said and did, you know, was picked up on. And I don't think he was a bad person. I think he had a lot of good qualities. From everything I've heard he's very generous, and he's, you know, very down to earth. And but, you know, to me, it's very hard. Not that I've ever done it, but I can't imagine leading that kind of lifestyle and it not affecting you as a person.
Yeah, absolutely. That's very well said. Going in clockwise order, a man who's known for the most straightest of straightforward opinions. Hollywood Son of the Dandy. When the whole Gawker thing came out, and I know that you were kind of out of the wrestling scene at that point, but tangentially you must have heard about it, read about it, whatever, known about it. Did that affect your view of Hulk Hogan, or did you more kind of put that off to the side in terms of what you thought about Hulk Hogan and then Terry Bollea?
Well, I kind of put it off to the side, like you said. And I mean, all of us, especially because I know for a fact all the stupid things I did much younger now than I am. And the things that we grew up in an era where you didn't record everything on a cell phone and didn't post everything on Twitter or post it on YouTube or on your blog or on Facebook or Instagram or all the different things where it's like, oh my goodness. And now like we live in this society that we just judge everyone for everything they say and every action, everything they do, and it never goes away. And I don't believe in that. As human beings, we're constantly growing and changing. So like even something that happens, what was this, 2012, I think that video came out, and it was from a 2007 clip. Like who knows like what changes occurred in Hogan's life that might have caused him to think, act, and speak differently than at the moment. Like we're all human beings, we're all flawed. So like I don't know, I just always separated it between the two. So like I don't condone the words, I don't condone the actions. Like I'm certainly not going to be sleeping with my buddy's wife, so you're safe, Andy.
Not offering up Orlando, by the way, just so real clear.
Right. So, I don't know. Like it's like I'm not going to judge him. So like.
So BC, as a fellow, we'll say, perturbed person who follows the internet wrestling community, just based on the journalism this past week, and again, I'm going to use those air quotes, Evan, I'm not talking about you, but I'm talking about journalism this past week, in the even hours after Hogan passed away. What did you make of this constant referral to this incident as the be-all, end-all of what you should remember about Hogan?
Well, first off, I'm really impressed with everybody's take on the situation and very open-minded as far as how it is. And I agree, like I'm the last person to say that I'm perfect or I'm not flawed or I don't have things that I'm not proud of in my past, right? Problem is, Hulk Hogan was a mythical character, and we had put him on a pedestal. Terry Bollea was a flawed human being, and he had some unfortunate moments in his life where those flaws came through. But we've all had those moments in our life where flaws have come through. The problem is when you have a hero and you have a mythical character, it's funny how you said, Andy, at the beginning that you didn't think Hulk Hogan would ever die. I kind of feel the same way, and probably because he always, at 71, he looked pretty similar to how he looked in his prime, right? Still jacked up and all that. But the problem is, with a mythical character, you almost need them to leave this earth early before any flaws can be shown, right? But unfortunately, he was around and he wasn't Hulk Hogan anymore. He was Terry Bollea, who had lived a life as Hulk Hogan and had been in the spotlight and had been cheered by millions and millions and millions of people and had been at the top of the world. And now you have to start to live as a human being now, and that's tough. And your flaws are going to be picked apart. And unfortunately, we live now in a gotcha society. You think about all the things that we talk about journalism. Think of all the things that the journalists covered up for people like Babe Ruth or Mickey Mantle or somebody like that in the past, right? That they would never let get out because they knew what effect that would have on people and their view of these celebrities and stars and stuff like that. But me and you have a very similar opinion of the IWC, as they call it. And right now we've got people who started watching wrestling in 2020, still buying Diddy tapes or Diddy music and, begging the WWE to put Chris Benoit in the Hall of Fame, calling Hogan a racist and a union buster and a just an overall piece of crap. Right. And it's like, they never even lived through the Hogan. They have no familiar. All they know is that a lot of them are just because of his politics that they'll hate Hogan, So it's you got to look at people from all aspects and realize everybody's flawed. Everybody's flawed. It's like the glass houses, right? Don't throw stones. So, I separate. I'm never going to change what Hulk Hogan meant to me as a kid or as a teenager or whatever. Terry Bollea, I don't know Terry Bollea. I'm not friends with Terry Bollea. I'm not somebody who met Terry Bollea. I just know Hulk Hogan, who I saw, and when I think of all the amazing memories I have of watching him, that's what I'll remember, right? And understand that he's a flawed human being that had to have his life put on display a lot of times.
I think ultimately, as fans, you have to draw the line what you will or won't accept, and will you continue to be a fan of somebody? Bruce Lee was one of my heroes. He collapsed at his mistress's house and died, and he had a loving wife and kids, and that wasn't a good look. I still worship Bruce Lee. James Brown imploded. I still worship James Brown.
Yeah.
I will not watch Chris Benoit. I won't. I mean, I think that's a line that I cannot accept. So I think, it's up to the individual. I can't look at Bill Cosby after all is said and done, but there's other, celebrities that have done terrible things, and there's a line in the sand, and you have to choose as a fan and as a adult with values and morals, will you or won't you accept them? That's basically it in a nutshell. It's not like pro wrestling. Hulk Hogan did tons of Make-A-Wish. He helped tons of people. He had a good side. I had people in the industry, legends, tell me how much they love the guy, how much he did for them. He had a good side too. So you have to decide the good and the bad. What will you or won't you accept as a fan, as a viewer? And that's basically it.
And even his last appearance in WWE, I believe was this past year in January, when they trotted him out in California to promote his new beer when they went on Netflix, and he got booed out of the building. So, I mean, that crowd made their decision right then and there. So,
well, I'm wondering if that is because one, he's in California, and then he just did the RNC, right? Which is that tremendous promo when he just tore his shirt off. They took a shot at my president, and whatever, right? So I don't know if it's left over from that, but I mean, it's a weird thing. If anybody has thoughts on that before I go off on my little soapbox here.
Well, we just have this weird thing in society now where this generation feels like we need to retroactively cancel out our memories of good memories of people because of something that happens in this day and age. What am I supposed to erase from my mind laughing at a Bill Cosby joke from 1982 because of what he did in later years? I can't change that memory, right? I can't change the memory of Hogan slamming Andre because of the fact that he goes and backs Trump or something like that. I'm sorry, but for some reason, this generation now thinks you got to retroactively erase those memories. And no, I'm sorry. It's like, one of my favorite wrestlers during the 90s was Chris Benoit. Okay, so I'm not going to hide that now and say, oh God, no, I couldn't stand Chris Benoit ever. I can't stand what he did. And I'll never support the fact that he should be in the Hall of Fame and stuff like that. But I'm not going to erase the fact that I enjoyed the hell of his matches when he was in Calgary or when he was in WCW or WWE. I mean, this is insane the way people react to some of this stuff.
It's not just the young generation, it's the old generation. I'll see right wingers go, I hate Barbra Streisand, I hate Bruce Springsteen, and the people on the left will go, I hate Ted Nugent, but you can't take away the fact that Ted Nugent plays a great guitar.
Hell yeah, he does.
I mean, it's a little ridiculous. You kind of have to separate the two. Otherwise, you'll have nobody to watch, or you'll lose half of them because they're on different sides, different teams.
So for myself, it's interesting. Just reading obituaries, not obituaries, but reading, the tales of Hulk Hogan throughout the years and reading people's thoughts on Twitter, including, I know I mentioned Meltzer, and I don't mean to single him out because there are lots of others like him. You get this one-sided view, right? You get, Hulk Hogan was all these things, but he was a horrible racist, and that's kind of the end of the discussion, right? For me, I look at the quality of a person. So, yeah, he said some terrible, horrible things, really horrible things. But at least he had the guts to come out and apologize and man up for it twice in 2 separate times in mainstream media. But you don't hear about that. It's interesting. In all of these write-ups that I've seen lambasting him as this horrible racist and cancel Hulk Hogan and piss on his grave before his body's in the dirt, not one of those articles mentioned that he had the balls to come out and actually apologize for it and man up. And you can say that it's PR and it's spin, and he probably did have somebody come up and say, hey, you should probably go on Entertainment Tonight or go on ABC, the 2 outlets that he did it, and apologize. Yeah, somebody probably did, but he had to do it. He still did it. So to me, I look at all the everybody here has said it way better than I ever could about all the stupid things they've done in their past, whatever. Hey, I got popped for DUI back when I was like 23. So should I forever then be known as the guy who, there's that drunk driver, Andy. What a terrible human being. No, I made a mistake. I paid my debt to society, and moved forward and grew up. And that's why I just drink at home instead of going out and driving, right? I don't need to do that kind of stuff. But if you don't allow somebody to have that personal growth, imagine going your whole life, whatever time you have left on this earth, being tied to one terrible mistake you made, right? Just terrible. And I love all these, Johnny come latelys in the internet wrestling scene who have all these hot takes because they're just trying to get clicks or whatever. And yeah, they get the clicks, and it's very face value, and it's just constant dribble. Where when you listen to the actual views of people who put their heart and soul into actually telling the story of the history of professional wrestling, like yourself, Evan, like yourself, Benny, like good friends of mine like Javier or whoever, Heath, for example, Heath McCoy. Like you look at guys like that's who I look to people like that and would form my judgment on that based a lot more than on, whatever a lot of the internet wrestling community comes up with. It's just a terrible situation. I wish we weren't like that, but 2025, I guess here we are.
A guy wrote an article today. The title was Hulk Hogan was a very bad man.
Good God.
Isn't that a little simplistic? Again, how about all the Make-A-Wish appearances that helped these kids who were struggling? That's not an easy thing to do. A lot of the wrestling community hated Cena. Cena did over 1,000 Make-A-Wish appearances.
Yeah.
Okay. Wrestling fans have this simplistic, very good or very bad. There's no in between. Maybe that's why they like wrestling. Heels, faces. This is the way they perceive the world, some of them. But, people have a good and bad side. And but here's the thing with journalism. And Benny will appreciate this because we're in the general same age range. Jim Brown died. Jim Brown was a great, great football player. Jim Brown was a huge movie star. Jim Brown was an activist during the civil rights era. Jim Brown did a lot of great stuff. But when he died, some people downplayed some of the spousal abuse allegations and charges. And journalism is telling both sides of a story. This was a complicated guy who had a good and bad side to him. And, sometimes you have to really, call it down the middle, and history will ultimately decide. And like I said before, 100 years from now, people aren't going to remember Hulk Hogan made a racist comment. They're going to remember, he wrestled Roddy Piper at Madison Square Garden or whatnot. He wrestled Andre the Giant in front of 33 million people on Saturday Night Main Event. 33 million people. You'll never have that again.
No.
Never, for any show. So history will ultimately decide who is what. And sometimes, it takes time. You look at presidents, history will decide this guy was or wasn't a great or terrible president. That's what happens.
Or prime ministers in our case. But I appreciate the sentiment for sure. Yeah, if anybody else had any closing thoughts, just so we can wrap that part of it up in a nice little bow.
I want to kind of expound on what Evan just said, as far as journalism. And it's really funny because, and I'm a huge baseball fan, Mickey Mantle was, I idolized Mickey Mantle before, actually, until I first discovered Bruno. Then Bruno replaced Mantle as my hero, and he did for my life. But Mickey Mantle actually got a postcard from Old Timers for Old Timers game, and he was asked, because they were going to read it out loud, what was your favorite moment at Yankee Stadium? And he said it was the time I got a blowjob under the right field bleachers. But Mickey Mantle, I mean, he probably had sex with as many women as he hit home runs. But but you never read about that back then because, the newspapers and the reporters, even John F. Kennedy with Marilyn Monroe, you didn't find out until years after. I mean, people kind of knew it, but journalists they protected who they thought were heroes. And now it's gone the complete, opposite, where like as a society, we love to build up heroes so we can destroy them. And, now with cell phones and everything else, I guess, theoretically, we're all journalists.
Well said, Benny.
Well, I mean, I wish the playing field was a little bit more slanted to gentlemen like you and Evan. So that's just my personal take on that one. So.
And I'm sure when Meltzer does his issue that he's going to write page after page on Hogan and he will say some positives. I don't have this deep-seated dislike of the guy that many in the wrestling community do. And I'm not a subscriber. We're not friends or anything, but I think he'll call it down the middle. Honestly, when you read the actual issue.
He was actually on a program in Canada because I was actually trying to follow a different news story about the Canadian junior team and those 5 players in the trial verdict. And I was watching.
Oh, what
CTV
a disaster
News.
that was! By the way.
Right. But I was watching CTV News and Meltzer actually came on and they did like a 5-minute clip on him. And he was very fair and it was very balanced coverage down the middle, like you said, Evan. So I think that will be what it'll be like in the newsletter.
I was on CTV yesterday in Toronto live, 7:37 in the morning, and they straight out asked me about the scandals. I was forced to, and I said exactly what I just said to Andy and you guys. I said, you have to separate the celebrity from the flawed human being and see both sides of it. And I had no desire to bury the guy on live TV in front of a sizable audience. Because I've had one, again, I'll repeat it. I've had one industry legend and, people in the industry have told me Hogan was good to them, treated them very kindly and generously. So there is that side, and you can't just ignore it because of the negative side.
Yeah, pretty well said. The one other, it's not related to this, but you'll hear from people in the industry will say about the politicking, right? BC, you brought up the point before about the union busting, for example. I think a lot of people don't understand what it was like back then and I'm talking about the 80s, 70s, 80s for professional wrestlers, right? If you there was no guaranteed contracts, there was nothing like that. If you're hurt, you can't work, that's it, you're done. I know that he got a lot of grief for the union busting thing. I honestly, and I stand to be corrected, so if anybody would like to, I'm all ears for it. But when Jesse Ventura was trying to form the Wrestlers Union, and Hogan went to Vince, as the legend tells, Hogan went to Vince and kiboshed the whole thing. Does anybody not think that there wouldn't have, if Hogan didn't do that, does anybody honestly not think that there wouldn't have been another wrestler who saw his opportunity to rise up the ladder and go to Vince and say, hey, Vince, by the way, here's what's happening? Does anybody else think that, or am I just on my own island on that one?
No, you're not. But like Vince McMahon, how long has he been gone for? We still don't have a union in wrestling.
Yeah.
So I mean,
remember, I forgot about that time that AEW was supposed to have a union, and
right.
That sure didn't happen either.
So one conversation back in 1986 or 87 is what killed the union for the rest of history. It's like, again, some of this stuff feels like folklore at some point, as far as all this stuff. And there's a lot more top guys than Hogan that didn't want a union, because those guys were making a lot of money at the top, and it would have changed the dynamic of that stuff, right? But I mean, I won't get too far into it. I know Evan and Benny probably have much more insight into this, but I look at it, it happened nearly 40 years ago and we still don't have a union. So it can't just be Hogan was the only guy that put a kibosh to this.
Union or no union, when guys like Billy Graham and Bushwhacker Butch and guys like that die needing GoFundMes, it's disgraceful that $1 billion.
Yes, I'm glad you said that.
Like WWE don't dig into their pocket and help these guys. Absolutely disgraceful. And even the NFL, and they're no Boy Scouts, they have a fund for their pioneers and legends, and you have to help these guys. So that's a whole separate show. We could do 2 hours on that.
Oh, we do 3 hours of that. 1 hour, that would be you and me yelling about how just ridiculous it is. Benny, just on the union aspect, is there anything that you wanted to add on that, or any thoughts you had, just generally speaking, about the lack of a union in professional wrestling?
No, I'm not really qualified to speak about that. But before I forget, or before we close the show, I do want to ask, because this is Grappling with Canada. So Hulk Hogan won the championship on January 23rd, 1984. 4 days later, he was in Japan, and he was facing Antonio Inoki and I think Tatsumi Fujinami in a tag match. So I want you, if anybody can guess, who was Hulk's tag team partner?
Mike Sharp.
There you go.
Yeah, it was Iron. Yeah.
I love Mike Sharp.
Sorry. Version 2, by the way. Version 2, because everybody knows Gene Kiniski was Canada's greatest athlete.
But he
passed that title on to Iron Mike Sharp. Yeah.
I mean, Sharp they wrestled together as a tag team like 7 or 8 times, I think, on that tour of Japan.
I'm surprised that Mike Sharp made it out of the shower to be able to wrestle in the other matches. Nobody gets that reference. Only I get it.
We know. Yeah. We all know.
Back in the States, and Sharp was still in the shower.
Yeah. I guess as we start to wrap up tonight, it's been a hell of a show and a great conversation. Just, I guess what I want to kind of touch on, and maybe we'll do just a discussion. I'm not going to point fingers and put anybody on the spot, but just generally speaking, what does the loss of a figure like this, not just Hogan specific, but I'm talking about when you lose a mainstay person of his caliber, like a Hogan we just lost, like a San Martino when he passed away, that was a deeply felt loss, especially in the New York market. Tolos was a big loss, right? When these megastars pass away, just what does that mean to you guys? Do you look at it as a positive, because not that they passed away, of course, but that people will go back into their careers and actually learn about who these people are? Or do you look at it like that's kind of a lost opportunity, and now they're gone, they're kind of going to get washed away?
It's a piece of your childhood, depending on the person and your age. When Bruce Lee died, I felt like I was kicked in the gut. When Muhammad Ali died, when James Brown died, these were heroes of mine when I was a kid. I'm from a different era. I can't say I feel it as strongly with Hogan, but I do understand, because I have friends who are younger than me, and they told me they were crying this week, because this was somebody they loved and that brought them into wrestling, and wrestling has meant so much to them for now 30, 40, 50, whatever the case may be. Hogan came in 83, I believe. So, you're talking 42 years already. And I saw him prior, 79, 80. So Hogan's been out there a long time and touched and reached and entertained a lot of people, and they're going to feel like a piece of their childhood was taken away. And yes, a new generation, a younger generation, will want to learn more about him and want to see his matches, or maybe they haven't seen Hogan teaming with Mike Sharp in Japan or whatnot, or seen how good a wrestler he was in Japan. He did a lot more. He did a lot more in Japan than he did in WWF as far as wrestling moves and such. So there's always room to learn more and expand and get a deeper appreciation of the celebrity, the talent, the wrestler. It's not just the scandals. There's more to a person.
Benny, what are your thoughts there?
Well, I was just thinking, Evan mentioned a few names, and for me, it was Bruno. I was crushed. I had seen him. I had eaten dinner with him 4 months before he passed away, sitting at a table with him and Dominic DeNucci and Donnie Iris, the rock star. It was a surreal night. That was in December of 2017. I think April 18th, he passed away, and I was crushed. But it just seems now, and again, it just maybe how society has become. There was a lot of Hogan hate on social media, and I mean, it's not like if Bob Sweetan passed away. It's like if you told me Bob Sweetan passed away, oh really? Okay, what's the special at Applebee's today? Because I don't really care about Bob Sweetan. But Hogan was a giant, and whether you liked him or whether you didn't like him, and I don't think none of us really, unless we knew him and traveled with him, everybody's entitled to their opinions, but sometimes I think it's in better taste just to keep it to yourself. I mean, the guy's not even in the grave yet, for God's sakes. But again, we're all journalists, we're all critics. Now we're all judge and jury too.
Hollywood.
I don't know. I'm just I don't know. I'm just like, I'm at a loss for words at the moment.
You're not the only one.
Yeah. So like, I know, like when I heard the news of his passing, like I was like stunned, because again, you think of like last year and you think about that promo that he did at the RNC, that was like, he just had so much life. But I mean, I guess it's like kind of come out that he was really struggling with his health in the last couple of months, and he had passed. But I don't know, like to me, he's always going to be like a hero of mine. I'm always going to have a special place for him in my heart. And I mean, I'm never like, anytime that I'm going to walk past the TV and they're going to have WrestleMania 3 on, like I'm going to watch that match with Andre. I'm going to do it every single time. So like, I don't know. To me, like, I just think the memories will live on.
BC.
Yeah, I think it's interesting how telling it is that, you have the fans and especially the IWC that are the ones that are dancing on the grave, as you mentioned, Andy, celebrating this stuff and calling him this, that, and the other thing.
Right.
Yet look at all his contemporaries, as Evan and Benny are talking about, all his peers, all the people that wrestle with him, including people of color that are just singing high praise of Hogan and have forgiven Hogan for some of his flaws that have happened, but to talk about how special he was to wrestling and what he meant to their paychecks and what he meant to the way the wrestling scene is now. So I take their opinions much more highly than I take of some jerk off in Sheboygan or something that doesn't have any connection to the wrestling scene. And I will say too, I get where you're going, Andy, with saying that when you said about a good thing about him passing. Steve made a good point about, and we never did get the cover, talking about his third run, which was that 2002 run after the match with The Rock in WWE. And I think even more than about the match with The Rock, but the next Raw in Montreal, I believe it was, where he got that standing ovation for 10 minutes, 15, I forget how long it was, but it was
That's the one I played at the top of the program tonight.
Right. So that to me, and this is going to mimic what's going on right now, it almost felt like people were finally like, we want to cheer Hogan. Like, he's Hulk Hogan. He's back in the WWE or WWF or whatever. We want to cheer him. We don't want him to be a bad guy. And it was almost like this release for the fans that they could finally cheer Hogan instead of him being NWO Hogan or WCW Hogan or the bad guy. And it was like a release. And I think for a lot of fans of Hulk Hogan who grew up watching Hulk Hogan, who followed his career from the late 70s right through to today, who felt like they couldn't cheer Hogan or speak fondly of him or have good memories of him, they're feeling a release now, because I'm seeing an outpouring of I've never seen an outpouring of what I've seen on social media from people that are just like talking about the memories and broken up about them and just the different things and just it's like they needed that. It's like they needed that chance to release. And like Steve said, it's just unfortunate that his last appearance at WWE gets booed out of the building because of politics as opposed to actual looking at what a legend he was. And so I think people are feeling a release now that like finally I can talk fondly of Hulk Hogan again, because he did give a lot of memories and he was a big part of a lot of people's childhood, adulthood, or teenage years.
Could I add something real quick?
Yeah.
I would see Hogan at the Garden, mid-'80s, and he's wrestling Greg Valentine, and prime Greg Valentine was as great as anybody. And Hogan beats him 8 minutes, the leg drop, predictable, boom. Greg's a dear friend of mine. I'm talking to him one day about Hogan, and he goes, "I make great money with Hogan. The matches were easy as could be. It was like picking grapes. That's how easy it was." That was the term he used. And he said, and he was good to me. He put me over, even though I lost, I jump him after the match. I put him in the figure 4 or whatnot. And he had nothing but good. And he actually said he was one of my dearest friends. That's what Greg Valentine said. So, sometimes the fans have a very different perspective than the actual wrestlers and peers. And it's complicated. Life is complicated. Fame is complicated, and somebody that's a little mature can see two sides of something. It's not just good guy or bad guy, heel or face. Life is complicated, more complicated than pro wrestling. Let's put it that way.
He put a lot of money in a lot of wrestlers' pockets. He really did.
Yeah.
And just one last thing there, Andy. Like, think about nobody's really touched on this. He passed away after having some extensive operations on his back, and his body finally couldn't take that. The reason he had those operations on his back was due to his wrestling career. So basically, he passed away getting operations due to the injuries that he sustained entertaining these wrestling fans. You know what I mean? So it's kind of the irony there, and yet people still just crap all over him, so he gave
It's
it up
not
for
lost on me.
Yeah.
But the other side of that is Vince McMahon, had these guys crisscrossing the nation and the planet 300 plus days a year like they were farm animals.
Mm-hmm.
That
Some
means,
could say 350 days.
that too. Well, Bret Hart as champion wrestled 330 days, and Greg Valentine told me he wrestled 320 days at his peak. So this is not conducive to longevity for the most part. You don't see a lot of wrestlers in their 80s and 90s and centenarians. It's it's not conducive to a long life what these guys were put through. So absolutely.
Yeah, very well said. That's probably about as perfect a point as we could hope to leave a program such as this off. Before I let you all go, I will get into what you guys are working on lately. Hollywood will be excluded from this part of the conversation, although he is hard at work in the bowels of the Element offices, and I very much appreciate, Hollywood, that you joined us for the conversation tonight. BC, before I let you go, you got to tell me what's happening with the Wrestling with the 80s YouTube account, because that's such a tremendous channel.
Well, not too much has been happening lately. Life has been getting in the way, but I'm not done. I'm just
I don't know what that's all about.
Yeah. So as you can tell, I'm a massive fan of wrestling in the 80s, and so that's what my YouTube channel is based on. So if you are a fan of wrestling with the 80s or wrestling in the 80s, come on over to Wrestling with the 80s on YouTube. A lot of what if scenarios, actually I have 2 videos that I made on Hulk Hogan, one on the anniversary of the first title win with WWF that I took great pride in, and also a one on Hogan and maybe the possible opponents that could have beat him during his magical run of 4 years when he was WWF champion. So yeah, and then if you want to just hear my sultry voice, it's I still have Wrestling with the Truth, which is the podcast version of talking about different eras of wrestling, not just the 80s. So head on over there to any podcast outlet, and maybe eventually I'll get that going again too.
All right, now, Evan, I know you had a book just come out, and you got one in the works as well. So let's hear what's going to happen with you.
My new book is Wrestling Rings, Blackboards, and Movie Sets, 100 plus true stories about working in the wrestling business as an agent, teaching, and filmmaking. I was associate producer on The Wrestler, 350 Days, executive producer, Wrestling Then and Now. Our podcast is Wrestling and Everything Coast to Coast. I have Evan Ginsberg's Old School Wrestling Memories on Facebook, and senior editor over at ProWrestlingStories.com.
And Benny, what's happening with yourself? Oh, sorry, go ahead. Sorry. Didn't mean to cut you off, Evan.
Yeah. I'm working on a John Tolis book also.
That's what I was looking for. I'm looking forward to that one for sure.
Thank you.
Benny, how about yourself?
All right, so now I am on the Playa Entertainment Network. I do 3 shows a week. On Monday night, I do True Crime with the bad girl of Playa and the Stars, a really good true crime show. On Wednesday, I do When It Was Real with Nikita Brezhnikov. This last week, we had the honor of having WWE Hall of Famer Johnny Rodz as our guest.
That's right.
I love chatting with that guy. And then Thursday, I do it's called Classic Pro Wrestling with the WFIA. The WFIA Wrestling Fans International Association was a very large fan club back in the 70s. I think they had about 50,000 members. And a couple of years ago, a couple of guys tried to revive it, and that's what they're in the process of doing. So that's their official podcast. Then on Sundays, I am on internet radio station WANT as Benny the Jet. I do a 3 o'clock every Sunday. I do a 2 or 3 hour oldies radio show, play oldies tunes.
And are you going to move Dan and Benny somewhere? What's going on with that?
Yeah, Dan and Benny's on a little bit of a hiatus. Forgot to mention that. Jeez, thanks for reminding me. See, I'm of
course. See, I'm on the ball as a host. I'm on the ball sometimes.
Yeah, Evan said he's 103. I don't even know how old I am. Once a year, I have to go to the lab and they carbon date me, so that I only get an approximate age. I get a range. But yeah, Dan is in the process of getting. I think he's switching jobs and he's moving into a new home. So we'll be back in a couple of weeks, and that'll be back on Tuesday night. We're not sure if it's going to be on my channel or we're going to create a new channel, but yeah, Dan and Benny's going strong. I think we've had 231 episodes spanning 4.5 years. That will not die.
Perfect. Well, gentlemen, this has been an absolute pleasure for myself. Quite the cathartic episode. I can say that for me. So thank you guys very much for joining. All of the information that everybody just laid out, except for Hollywood's work at Element, will be listed in tonight's show notes. And again, I can't thank you guys enough for your time tonight. I will let you all go, and I'll finish this thing up in just a minute. But thank you all so much for your time tonight.
All right.
It's a pleasure. Thank you.
Good night, all.
Thanks, Sandy.
Bye, everybody.
Bye, everyone.
All right. As we close some windows here, everybody loves technology. Tremendous stuff. Now you're just left with my ugly mug as I try and close this thing out tonight. Oh boy. So it's been an interesting couple of years. Well, couple of years since the last episode of Grappling with Canada. One of these days, I will tell the tale of the hiatus, the unexpected hiatus of Grappling with Canada. The last episode I did actually included two of the guests that I had tonight. We did a career retrospective of Ivan Koloff. It was an awesome episode. It's been downloaded. Can't tell you how many tens of thousands of times at this point. Don't let the YouTube numbers fool you. It's a podcast. So, YouTube, nobody. I don't know. This program is not really meant for YouTube. Tonight's a little bit different because we had the video portion. I don't normally have that, but that was a great episode. And then, BC put it perfectly. Life gets in the way, and maybe one day I will elaborate on that. But tonight is not the time for that. Tonight was a tremendous look back at. Tonight was a tremendous look at Hulk Hogan and just what he meant for us wrestling fans. At the end of the day, whether you're a podcaster, whether you're a journalist, I know I've laid it on pretty thick on journalists tonight, but whether you're a journalist, whether you're just somebody who watches, you're a fan at the end of the day. And it's tough when somebody like that passes away. There's a very specific reason that I titled today's episode Remembering Immortal Hulk Hogan, because Terry Bollea may have died, but Hulk Hogan most definitely will live forever. All of the information for today's guests will be laid out in the show notes of today's episode at a later time. So if you see this in your podcast feed, it will be included. If you have been watching with us live on YouTube or you're catching the replay and it's not there, check back again. It's going to be there. It's going to take me a little bit to there's going to be no editing tonight. I don't feel like this show needed to be edited at all. But all of their information will be listed in the episode description today, as well as the tremendous hit that Marty Goldstein joined us with today. And what a great piece. Marty Goldstein, Dr. Marty Goldstein does such great work, both with the Great Canadian Talk Show podcast, not all of which I appreciate, or not all of which I agree with, but I can appreciate the work that he puts in. Does a hell of a job with the Winnipeg Sun, too. So if you're in Winnipeg, check out the Winnipeg Sun. Great friend of the show, Dr. Marty Goldstein. Anyways, all that information is going to be listed in the show notes for today's episode. We had a great comment from Jen in the comments today. Hi, all. Much respect to you for honoring Hogan this evening. My heart truly goes out to all the Hogan fans everywhere. He is a great loss for professional wrestling, and he will be very missed. And that is a tremendous comment and probably a tremendous way to leave this episode tonight. So for myself, Andy the Taxman, I will leave you as I normally do by asking you to take care of yourselves. Very important, something that I didn't do. Take care of yourselves and each other. And I will leave you with possibly the greatest Hogan entrance of all time. Take care, everybody, truly, and I hope we can do this again. All my best.